Morena Koto, welcome to story time for today. I'm joined again by Toby the cat. Here's his tail, he's waving his tail to say hi. Hey, we're going to be reading today Perfectly Norman, and then we'll continue on with James and the Giant Peach. So first up, Perfectly Norman. Norman had always been normal, perfectly normal, until one day he grew a pair of wings. Norman had imagined growing taller or growing a beard like his dad, but he had never imagined growing a pair of wings. Still, they were here now, so he decided to test them out right away. Soon Norman was swooping around and generally having the most fun ever. But then he had to go in for dinner. You see, Norman had always been so normal, he didn't know how his parents would feel about his extraordinary wings. As he went in, Norman covered himself up in a great big coat. His parents didn't notice the wings, but they did think it was odd to be wearing a coat indoors. Bath time was a bit problematic, and so was bedtime. The coat was hot, uncomfortable, but Norman had decided that no one should see his wings ever. The next day, Norman went to the park, but he was far too hot to play any of his favourite games. And so it went on. Long car journeys were unbearable. The swimming pool was dreadful. And that was nothing compared to his friends' birthday parties. The only time that Norman could feel normal now was when it rained. One day, a boy tried to pull his coat off, and Norman had to run away, hot-faced, angry, and sad. He wished he had never grown those stupid wings. Then he saw some birds high up in the sky and remembered the joy of his first flight. It occurred to Norman that it was the coat that was making him miserable, not the wings. Why don't you take that tatty old thing off? Suggested his mum and dad. Norman looked up at them hesitantly. His parents smiled and nodded, and Norman smiled back. Then he threw off the coat and let his wonderful wings span out. Norman leapt into the air. Finally, he was free of that coat. He noticed a few other children wearing thick, heavy coats of their own. They looked up at Norman and round at each other nervously. There was a moment's pause. Then, whoosh! The sky was filled with flying people. Norman had never felt so happy. He realized that there was no such thing as perfectly normal. But he was perfectly Norman, which was just as it should be. And that's a really cool story about it, making sure that you are yourselves. You don't have to pretend to be anyone else except you. All right. Chapter 14 of James and the Giant Peach. We're about a third of the way through the story. All right. So we'd met all of the insects and the characters, and they'd just gone to sleep after what had been a really busy day. "We're off!" someone was shouting. "We're off at last!" James woke up with a jump and looked about him. The creatures were all out of their hammocks and moving excitedly around the room. Suddenly, the floor gave a great heave as though an earthquake were taking place. "Here we go!" shouted the old green grasshopper, hopping up and down with excitement. "Hold on tight!" What's happening? Cried James, leaping out of his hammock. What's going on? The ladybird, who was obviously a kind and gentle creature, came over and stood beside him. In case you don't know it, she said, we're about to depart forever from the top of the grassy hill and we've all been living on for so long. We're going to roll away inside this great big beautiful peach to a land a land of what? Asked James. Never you mind, said the ladybird, but nothing worse could be worse than this desolate hilltop with those two repulsive aunts of yours. Hear, hear, they all shouted. Hear, hear. You may not have noticed it, the ladybird went on, but the whole garden, even before it reaches the steep edge of the cliff, happens to be on a steep slope. And therefore, the only thing that has been stopping this peach from rolling away from the beginning is the thick stem attaching it to the tree. Break the stem off, and away we go. Watch it, cried Miss Spider as the room gave another violent lurch. Here we go. Not quite, not quite. At this moment, continued the ladybird, our centipede, who has a pair of jaws, hello Toby, as sharp as razors, is up there on top of the peach, nibbling away at that stem. In fact, he must be nearly through it, as you can tell from the way we're lurching about. Would you like me to take you under my wing so that you won't fall over when we start rolling? That's very kind of you, said James, but I think I'll be all right. Just then, the centipede stuck his grinning face through the hole in the ceiling and shouted, I'm done. We're off. We're off, the others cried. We're off. The journey begins, shouted the centipede. And who knows where it will end, muttered the earthworm. If you have anything to do with it, it can only mean trouble. Nonsense, said the ladybird. We are about to visit the most marvelous places and see the most wonderful things. Isn't that so, centipede? There is no knowing what we'll see, cried the centipede. We may see a creature with 49 heads who lives in the desolate snow, and whenever he catches a cold which he dreads, he has 49 noses to blow. We may see the venomous pink-spotted scrunch who can chew up a man with one bite. It likes to eat 5 of them roasted for lunch and 18 for its supper at night. We may see a dragon, and nobody knows that we won't see a unicorn there. We may see a terrible monster with toes growing out of tufts of his hair. We may see the sweet little bitty bright hen, so playful, so kind and well bred, and such beautiful eggs you just boil them and then they explode and blow off your head. A new and rhinoceros surely we'll see, and the enormous ignorable gnat, whose sting when it stings you goes in at the knee and comes out through the top of your hat. We may even get lost and be frozen by frost, or we may die in an earthquake or tremor, or nastier still, we may even be tossed on the horns of a furious dilemma. But who cares? Let us go for this horrible hill. Let us roll, let us bowl, let us plunge. Let's go rolling and bowling and spinning until we're away from old Spiker and Sponge. 1 second later, slowly, insidiously, almost gently, the great peach started to lean forward and steal into motion. The whole room began to tilt over and all the furniture went sliding across the floor and crashed against the far wall. So did James and the ladybird and the old green grasshopper and Miss Spider and the earthworm and also the centipede who had just come slithering down the wall. Chapter 15. Outside in the garden, at that very moment, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker had just taken their places at the front gate, each with a bunch of tickets in her hand, and the first stream of early morning sightseers was visible in the distance, climbing up the hill to view the peach. We shall make a fortune today, Aunt Spiker was saying. Just look at all those people. Wonder what became of that horrible little boy of ours last night, Aunt Sponge said. He never did come back, and did he? He probably fell down in the dark and broke his leg, Aunt Spiker said. Or his neck, maybe, Aunt Sponge said hopefully. Just wait till I get my hands on him, Aunt Spiker said, waving her cane. He'll never want to stay out all night again by the time I'm finished with him. Good gracious me. What's that awful noise? Both women swung round to look. The noise, of course, had been caused by the giant peach crashing through the fence that surrounded it, and now gathering speed every second it came rolling across the garden towards the place where Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker were standing. They gaped. They screamed. They panicked. They both got in each other's way. They began pushing and jostling, and each one of them was thinking only about saving herself. Aunt Sponge, the fat one, tripped over a box that she had brought along to keep the money in and fell flat on her face. Aunt Sponge came down on top of her. They both lay on the ground, fighting and clawing and yelling and struggling frantically to get up again. But before they could do this, the mighty Peach was upon them. There was a crunch. And then there was silence. The Peach rolled on, and behind it, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker lay ironed out upon the grass as flat and thin and lifeless as a couple of paper dolls cut out of a picture book. Chapter 16. And now the Peach had broken out of the garden and was over the edge of the hill, rolling and bouncing down the steep slope at a terrific pace. Faster and faster and faster it went, and the crowds of people who were climbing up the hill suddenly caught sight of this terrible monster plunging down upon them, and they screamed and scattered to right and left as it went hurtling by. At the bottom of the hill, it charged across the road, knocking over a telegraph pole and flattening 2 parked cars as it went by. Then it rushed madly across the 20 fields, breaking down all the fences and hedges in its path. It went right through the middle of a herd of fine Jersey cows, and then through a flock of sheep, and then through a paddock full of horses, and then through a yard full of pigs, and soon the whole countryside was a seething mass of panic-stricken animals stampeding in all directions. The Peach was still going at a tremendous speed, with no sign of slowing down, and about a mile farther on it came to a village. Down the main street of the village it rolled, with people leaping frantically out of its path, right and left. And at the end of the street it went crashing right through the wall of an enormous building and out the other side, leaving 2 gaping round holes in the brickwork. This building happened to be a famous factory where they made chocolate, and almost at once a great river of warm melted chocolate came pouring out of the holes in the factory wall. A minute later, this brown sticky mess was flowing through every street in the village, oozing under the doors of houses and into people's shops and gardens. Children were wading in and out of it up to their knees, and some of them were even trying to swim in it, and all of them were sucking it into their mouths in great greedy gulps and shrieking with joy. I wonder if that was Willy Wonka's factory by any chance. It'd be very interesting to see. But the Peach rushed on across the countryside, on and on and on, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Cowsheds, stables, pigsties, barns, bungalows, hayricks, anything that got in its way went toppling over like a ninepin. An old man sitting quietly beside a stream had his fishing rod whisked out of his hands as it went dashing by, and a woman called Daisy Entwhistle was standing so close to it as it passed that she had the skin taken off the tip of her long nose. Would it ever stop? Why should it? A round object will always keep on rolling as long as it's on a downhill slope. And in this case, the land sloped downhill all the way until it reached the ocean. The same ocean that James had begged his aunts to be allowed to visit the day before. Well, perhaps he was going to visit it now. The Peach was rushing closer and closer to it every second, and closer also to the towering white cliffs that came first. These cliffs are the most famous in the whole of England, and they are hundreds of feet high. Below them, the sea is deep and cold and hungry. Many ships have been swallowed up and lost forever on this part of the coast, and all the men who are in them as well. The Peach was now only 100 yards away from the cliff, now 50, now 20, now 10, now 5, and when it reached the edge of the cliff, it seemed to leap up into the sky and hang there, suspended for a few seconds, still turning over and over in the air. Then it began to fall, down, 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 and smack! It hit the water with a colossal splash and sank like a stone. But a few seconds later, up it came again, and this time up it stayed, floating serenely upon the surface of the water. We're going to stop there for James and the Giant Peach. We're going to find out what happened to everyone who was inside of the Peach tomorrow. So, hey, just thought I'd let you know that this afternoon we have got a special Google Meet for all of our Rainbow Team students at 2:30. We're going to call it Afternoon Tea with Mr. D, so it's a chance to catch up. The link has been sent out to your parents and to your seesaw, so you can check that out. It'd be great to see you. We're just going to hang out and tell me what you've been up to. And then tomorrow we'll be doing the same for our Sunshine team at the same time. So it's 2:30 this afternoon. Hey, thanks for joining us for Story Time. Great to have you with us, and we'll catch up with you either this afternoon if you're a Rainbow Team or tomorrow for everybody else. Ka kite anō.